I'm Dominic Patten from Deadline Hollywood. Thank you so much for joining us on a Friday evening during, the Olympics. Double plus for you guys. So a silver, possibly a gold later. What did you think of the first episode? Now, how many of you have seen The Night Manager before? Oh, great. So, to some of you, you will care about this. Tomorrow, AMC will be replaying the entire series, so you can do a big binge, which, you don't always need Netflix to do. That's very good because this is a show that has received 12 Emmy nominations, including for Mr. Hugh Laurie, for Olivia Colman, and of course for director Suzanne Bier. It has also received an Emmy nomination for the gentleman who's about to join us. Tom Hiddleston has had what you can only describe as a varied career, which in today's world, honestly, a lot of people don't do. They find a lane, so to speak, and they stick in it. Tom became known to many people, besides his theater career back in the UK and what have you. Many, many people grew to know him as the villainous Loki from the Marvel movies. Then we saw him move into other roles. We saw him, for instance, we saw him in The Night Manager. And we are soon going to see him coming up next year. There will be yet another Thor movie. There will also be Kong Skull Island, which is kind of an expansion of the Godzilla franchise, and of course many more projects. Last year we saw him in what I thought was one of the great films of 2015, 2016, which is I Saw the Light, where he portrayed Hank Williams, which I think was a very, very, very interesting choice for him and a very, very well executed one, and one I want to talk about tonight. Now, we are going to be speaking for about an hour, so if you guys have babysitters or plans, you might make a call now. We might even go longer. This might become a Grateful Dead concert version of the SAG-AFTRA Foundation. But we're also going to talk about a lot of parts of Tom's career, and we also have some questions from you guys that you submitted earlier before coming in, and I have to tell you, they're fantastic, your questions. So thank you so much. So ladies and gentlemen, if you wouldn't mind, please welcome Mr. Tom Hiddleston.
Thank you, everybody, very much.
You look very nice in your glasses.
Well, I need these to see you initially, and then I can take them off. Thank you so much for having me. I've come to SAG once before, and I had such a good time, and it's so nice to be in a room full of actors.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that gives us a real opportunity to speak seriously about acting. One of the things I know that you've done... Seriously-ish.
Yeah, sure.
One of the things I know that of something that you really have put some time and thought into in terms of your craft is the notion of identity, the notion of what the identity is the actor plays, the multiple identities. So I wanted to get a sense, let's use Jonathan Pine as the prime example here, because here's a character who starts off as a man who has retreated from the world, who literally is a man who's put himself in service, and he becomes something very different. Becomes a man of action, becomes a man of conscience, becomes a man of passion. Let's talk about the identities of Jonathan Pine and how those identities inform Tom Hiddleston's portrayal of him in The Night Manager. I told you, it's a Grateful Dead. We start with the big Jerry Garcia guitar solo and just lay it out there.
Well, thank you. It's a beautiful question. I personally, I see acting as an exploration of identity. I believe that we contain multitudes, to quote or bastardize Walt Whitman, and that the medium exists, the forms of dramatic art exist to remind us that we are essentially the same. That there are things which are different about us, but actually beneath that, there are things that are true to a common experience of being alive, and that those things are what we cleave to when we watch films or we go to the theater or we watch television. And I was reminded, I recently watched, I'm diverting slightly, but I'll come back to The Night Manager, I promise.
It's the Grateful Dead. Okay. It goes all around, my friend.
Because
he's quite the guitar player if you've seen the Hank Williams film.
Thankfully, there are no guitars in the building tonight. I recently watched a documentary about Marlon Brando called "Listen to Me, Marlon." If you haven't seen it, seek it out. It is an astonishing reminder of his legacy, and how he changed, essentially, he changed the form, he changed the craft forever. And there's a lot of Stella Adler who taught him, and she said that the very famous quote: "Life beats down and crushes the soul, and art reminds you that you have one." And that theme is something that I feel that's something that's why I love the cinema so much. That's why I love acting, is the demand is to commit your own soul to express something. And to speak specifically about Jonathan Pine, he is someone who I think begins The Night Manager as a shell of a human. He's someone who is hiding behind anonymity. He's hidden behind service all his life. He hid behind the anonymity of a soldier's uniform, and now he hides behind the anonymity of the night manager's uniform. And what happens with Sophie commits him to act in a very different way and begin a journey of discovery and courage. And that through the thing that Olivia Colman's character urges him to do in episode 2 is to embrace his darkness. She says, "You have half a psychopath lurking in there. Find it. Unleash it. Expand it." And in order to do this incredibly brave thing, which is to stop Richard Roper from doing what he does, which is to profit from a trade in death. He sells British and American weapons to the highest bidder, and he makes money from it. And in order to do this, in order to stop this malevolent man, he has to do something himself that's very dangerous, which is surrender his identity.
Now, what was that for you as a performer?
Yeah.
Because there are at least 5 or 6 touch points in the character as he progresses through the evolution, as he evolves through the progression of the show. How did you find those? And what for you, would there be something you would identify with and say, that's the speck, now I'm going to grow it, or the seed, rather, I'm going to grow it?
I think it's in John le Carré's novel, first of all. There is the way he writes Pine. I've quoted this before, but there's such an extraordinary paragraph. I think it's the opening of the 3rd chapter, where Pine is described as a itinerant chef, hotelier, a collector of other people's languages, a perpetual escapee from emotional entanglement, a self-exiled creature of the night, and a sailor without a destination. This is an empty man. This is someone who is deeply alone, and I think he falls in love with Sophie in a way that is life-changing. And through the course of essentially surrendering the identity of Jonathan Pine, he discovers things by taking on, he is, in a sense, an actor. He becomes Jack London, he becomes Thomas Quince, he becomes Andrew Birch. And along the way, it's almost like he's the most method actor of all method actors. He's so immersed in these characterizations that he truly becomes them. And I think he starts to believe in them in order that the people around him believe in them. If his cover is blown, he's a dead man.
It's the con. He has to pull it off.
Yeah. And so that to me was fascinating, is that there is a part of Pine that is drawn towards Roper, that in a different context, he admires the man.
Well, there certainly is a point, I would say definitely by episode 3, where there's Roper is a man who has a son but doesn't have an heir.
Yeah.
And Pine is a man who ostensibly doesn't have a father. And somewhere there's a relationship there. Not sexual, not romantic, but there's a bond there that now begins to evolve.
Yeah, I think Roper has been, perhaps for some time, seeking out a successor. Someone who would be able to run his business. And he doesn't have one. And in Pine, he sees that successor, which is a kind of inverted father-son relationship. Pine lost his father at a very young age. And you see this connection. They have a chemistry. They share a frame of reference and a sense of humor. And I think that's what makes it, I hope, exciting and was thrilling to play, is that actually these are two men who are drawn to each other, and they are alike in many respects. And yet their division is a crucial one, which is they are divided by a line, and that line is moral. Is that Roper thinks it's okay to do what he does, and Pine fervently believes that it's not.
One of the things, we did a piece on Deadline a few weeks ago where we talked to the casting director from The Night Manager, and one of the things came up was the amazing chemistry between you and Hugh, which I think is very evident on screen. And I mean, I've sat with the two of you and interviewed, and obviously you've become quite chummy and friendly and what have you. But that relationship, I want to get a sense what it was like for you when you first came on set working with Hugh, and how the two of you developed that relationship. Because of course the book was it's written in 1993, based at the end of the Cold War. The television series is based at kind of the tail end of the Arab Spring. So there was a lot that had to be adapted. There was a lot of space there for which you guys to fill. Yeah. What was that like between the two of you? How did you do it?
It's so interesting how it's retrospectively to try to kind of trace my steps back. I mean, Hugh is The Night Manager is one of his favorite novels. He
optioned it at one point.
He did. He tells a story about trying to option it and not knowing on earth what optioning means. But nevertheless, he was going to try. Damn it. And develop it, but actually, at the time, it's interesting. The Night Manager had an interesting life in the film business. It's been documented at the time. He tried to essentially to play Pine. When it was published in '93, he wanted to play Pine, and at the time, the rights were owned by Sidney Pollack, who was working on a script with Robert Towne, of all people, and they worked on that and it never came to fruition. And then I think the rights went to Plan B, Brad Pitt's company, and there was a movie perhaps in the offing there, but nothing ever came of it. And in Hugh's words, hair falls out and knees get creaky. So he found himself playing Roper, not Pine. But we met.
Did he ever give you grief about that?
It was early.
He did, didn't he? He definitely gave you grief about it.
It was early January, and we decided that we should meet for lunch. This is about 2 months before we started shooting, and it was a very cold day in London, and we went out to lunch, and it was one of the first things he told me. He said...
Had you met before?
No. I mean, we met briefly, but he said, I wanted to play your part. So no pressure. But he was...
Thanks, Mr. House.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. But literally after that, he was such a champion. He was so invested in the story, in the project. And we talked about its contemporary resonance. We talked about the anger in the writing. He was a font of knowledge and wisdom about le Carré's work. He's read all of it and knows it very well. And was a real champion of trying to retain the sophistication of his writing within the adaptation. That was the worry, is that you take a master like John le Carré and translate that for the screen. You don't want to lose...
You don't want the wine to turn to vinegar.
And that's it. That's it. And he was a real champion for that.
And and you guys, you did not do that. The wine, I think, breathed, actually. I think that's one of the great things about it.
Thank
you.
The
script is amazing. The script is fantastic. And the way that Susanna kind of brought those elements, the visual elements that allowed, especially the four of you, the main actors, you, Elizabeth, Olivia, and Hugh, I think you contained a world. And a world's very hard when you're working in the realm of what's essentially a revolution in a region.
Well, you know what? One of the first things that Hugh and I talked about in the first lunch was how it's an exploration of what it means to be English. The Night Manager is really about Englishness in so many ways. That could be the subheading, The Night Manager.
A very English problem.
Yeah. With the way we phrased it was The Night Manager, or what the fuck does it mean to be English? Is the Englishness is...
So there definitely is a sequel.
But Englishness is so important in it, or the analysis of English cultural identity and pride in what that means.
Come back to that phrase, identity. See, I think that's so much the core of this story.
I think it's to do with truthfully, I think that Burr's anger and Pine's anger are united, and they express le Carré's anger. And le Carré's anger is this, that Richard Roper is an inheritor of all the privileges of Western democracy. He was born into a country which believes in free speech and a good education, and he is blessed with so much good fortune, and that he has used that to do the worst things imaginable. It is why le Carré is so angry with him, that there is a man with a British passport out there who is spilling blood and making money from it. And
walking away.
I think
that's a very important part.
And that there is a world, and le Carré knows it because he was inside it, there is a world where there's an extraordinary line delivered brilliantly by Tobias Menzies, who plays one of the very higher-ups at MI6, who says to Burr, "This country needs Richard Roper." The idea that there is, on the inside, a network of conversations that take place behind closed doors that remain mysterious to the people who elected those officials. That somehow Roper is allowed to lead a billionaire's lifestyle by selling weapons to the highest bidder and profiting from the problem of the military-industrial complex, that somewhere in the world someone will need weapons, and that he might as well make money from that, and that in le Carré's mind is a moral crime.
I also think one of the interesting things too, and le Carré does, you're very right about this, something he touches on throughout various books is the idea of the waning British Empire. And the sort of sense is Britain doesn't have a lot of power, but it still has a lot of influence. And people like Roper find their way to weave around those old diplomatic channels, to weave into parts of the world where a British accent and a British passport still conveys some sense of that you have a sense of what you're doing and that you're connected. Yeah. Pine is the reverse of that. He's a military man. You have an impression he's an educated man, but certainly perhaps not as educated as Mr. Roper is. You have a sense that he understands privilege but doesn't inhibit it. So how did you find for yourself, did you find that character through the various phrases and phases that he goes through once he's a part of Roper's circle? Because as you said, he's method at that point. He's playing a role, but he's also seducing, he's also killing.
I think I love the idea of that he's calling upon his discretion and his training as a night manager. That as you see in episode 1, that it goes with the territory of the job to be impeccably turned out, very well mannered, to hide your true feelings and be deferential to authority. And that actually that's what Roper's so impressed by. That Pine is charming, he's efficient, he's quiet, unassuming, can fade into the background and emerge when required. Roper is sort of, and also the idea that it's so clever that Roper has a blind spot, which is that his son was kidnapped, and that the man who saved his son is somehow deserving of special reward, which Corky, Tom Hollander's character, obviously hates. And Corky is a wonderful creation, and Tom Hollander does it so brilliantly, I think. Yeah.
And there's many levels of Corky. I mean, it takes a while to realize both what his love-hate relationship with Pine is, and there's certainly there's a psychosexual element as well as a competing for daddy's love.
Absolutely, it's Corky is
also known as a very British problem.
right, yeah, you're right about that. Corky is, he's interesting, he's just sort of, I find him so believable. It's such a believable character, this idea of someone who was ex-military, maybe went into security or defense, was hired by Roper to be his front man or right-hand man. And there's something bitter and cynical and mean-spirited about him, which also makes him very funny, that he doesn't have any requirement to be liked. So he's able to threaten with great menace and a kind of perverse, dark sense of humor, just the way he phrases things, the way the cod affection with which he calls Pine old love, old heart. Dear me, old boy, those muscles were awfully saucy, weren't they?
You were very good Tom Hollander, by the way. Maybe we're not going to do a Grateful Dead show. Maybe we're going to do Don Rickles tonight. So, but part of it is interesting for the Night Manager. Now, you were, as well as the lead, you were also an executive producer. And looking at, yes, very good, you can clap for that. It's a very busy job, yes. And it has some real responsibilities. And it also, one of the things about this is there was the adaptation of the book. And looking at how do we tell a 21st century story here? You very passionately talked about the menace of arms dealing and the proliferation of it, perhaps now more than ever, because there's more sellers and there's more buyers than there were in the Cold War. At least in the Cold War, you knew where everyone was on the books. Yeah. I wanted to get a sense about how was that in terms of being a producer, the executive producer, and how did that work in terms of your own role on the show?
Well, all it really means is I was invited alongside Hugh and Susanna to be part of conversations in development. It meant that Hugh and I signed on having read episode 1. And
had you read the book?
I hadn't at that point. Episode 1 was...
You're supposed to lie to me about it.
So I've read it many times since then.
Well, dog-eared versions.
Yeah. Stephen Garrett joked that it might not be beneficial to bring the book on set because I kept diving into it to read passages aloud at the time, which maybe was obstructive to... the shooting schedule. We needed to get it done.
Oh my God, there's a DVD version of this. It's a whole other night. There's The Afternoon Manager.
Right, exactly, yeah. Let me tell you a story. Yeah. My role as an executive producer was really just a greater investment in the development of the story, an investment in the development of each script, and being included in conversations that I found very thrilling, where we would just throw ideas around. How does this story speak to the modern world? And finding ways of making it dangerous and enticing. Because I think that's what Suzanne did so brilliantly, is she allows you to see that this man who is described as the worst man in the world is also the most charming and the most seductive and the most affable. And that Roper's life is one that doesn't seem too bad. This life he leads, he's funny, he's urbane, he's witty. Those sorts of conversations were interesting. And in those moments, you talk about other films, you talk about things that worked, things that didn't. I remember we talked long about the Arab Spring riots themselves that took place in 2011. This was a popular uprising, mobilized largely through Facebook, and that's why the authorities didn't see it coming. To depose,
it happened in Egypt, Tunisia, Libya, other parts of the region, and were shut down very fast in places like Saudi Arabia and Sudan very quickly.
Yeah. And they would to depose Hosni Mubarak, and Mubarak did resign. And the riots were, it felt like it really felt like an uprising of the people. And I remember poring through a documentary which I'd seen on Al Jazeera about the riots specifically in Cairo. And then working with the ADs in staging those riots, making sure that the fantastic Moroccan extras were chanting the right things. I remember we all sat down and watched it that morning and said, this is what the extras have to say. Because it's important to get these things right. You have a duty when you're dealing with a piece of history to be accurate. And so those conversations, for me, were the most exciting.
One thing that in the episode we've just seen, there's that scene when he's going to work. And he literally has to walk through a riot. And you realize that this is part of what life is like in a region like that, but people still have to show up to work. People still have to do things. People have to get taxis for people and what have you. As you guys filmed all over the place, approximately a budget of $30 million. But I know from having spoken with Suzanne, with Hugh, and with you, and Elizabeth and Olivia, it very much felt almost like there was a little core band of you. A few other people on part. You were kind of punk rock about this.
Yeah. It felt
also known as a very British problem.
That's why it felt so great, I think, is we felt very nimble. We felt it was it felt like a small band of people who cared very passionately about this thing. And we were pushing the boulder over the hill together. And
I have to ask you this. We'll get to this other part. Sure. But has the old man, has le Carré ever reached out and said, you were good?
He has. Pleased to say. Thank you. It was one of the great moments of my life. He wrote an email after watching the first cut, and he closed the email with one line which read, "Pine made perfect."
Nice.
So it's very, very. It feels immodest to repeat it, but it was.
Back that up on your server, pal.
And then he did a very sweet thing. He sent me a first edition of The 7 Pillars of Wisdom by T.E. Lawrence, because there's something very Lawrence.
You know what? It's very funny you say that, because Lawrence is, and I don't mean this in the Peter O'Toole. It very much is. There's an essence of that there. There is the Brit in the area.
Yeah, but it's something about. There's something very Laurentian about a British man who finds himself, discovers who he is far afield. That actually that he is drawn to the wild romance of the Middle East, and that's where he finds himself. And I think that's true of Pine. I think in the opening scene, you see a man who is probably addicted to a high stress environment. He was a soldier who served in the Second Iraq War of 2003, and he never went home. And he's chosen to stay in Cairo. He says in the novel, he says it's one of the attractions of the trade. And so I think there is something quite Laurentian about that, about the discovery that he feels uniquely British, but he's a man out of that comfort zone, and probably someone who perhaps is uncomfortable at home.
Was that, for those of you who've read the book, the show ends differently than the book.
Yeah.
Let's just say, to not give anything away, a little less domestically.
Yeah.
Was that part of the discussions insofar as Pine's character, as he's a man who's not ready to go home?
Yes, I think we all discussed this, and there's something. Well, first of all, it's important to point out that in the book, Roper is selling arms for drugs to Colombian drug cartels, and I think in the early 90s that was a very resonant story, and we felt that perhaps that story had been told already on screen and in many fantastic ways. So this had to speak to a modern audience and have a resonance in our political climate, which is why the idea that there is a man like Roper selling weapons on the Syrian border, a place of enormous, with the border with Turkey and Syria, that could be, who knows where those weapons end up.
They don't end up in a good place.
They don't. And that's that speech in episode 4 by Olivia Colman about the school sports day, where she talks about his purchase of sarin gas and the effects of sarin gas on children. And that's why she's chasing him. Those things felt very appropriate for our time, and that somehow, after we had made those updates, we had to find a satisfactory ending, and it certainly wasn't my idea, but it was a sort of an idea from the executive, from Simon Cornwell and Stephen Garrett and David Farr.
Simon Cornwell is one of John le Carré's sons.
That's right, yeah. So the producers, Simon Cornwell and Stephen Cornwell, are the sons of John le Carré, whose real name is David Cornwell. So that felt to everybody that somehow, having established Cairo, that we should go back to Cairo. That would be a very thrilling conclusion, is to see Roper take Pine back to the Nefertiti Hotel and see what happens. That's where the deal
that's where I felt in many ways it went full circle, as it obviously does, but it went full circle for the character and for you as an actor, because you truly, I guess you paraphrased Walt Whitman, so I'm going to to top you and go Joseph Campbell. And you became the hero of 1,000 Faces because he walked back into the place where he worked, and he walked almost like a ghost. Yeah. It was like, you're not that guy. You look like that guy, but there's another guy. You don't seem like him. You found another form.
Well, that's what we talked. I mean, that's what we talked about. It was interesting. The exigencies of the shoot meant that I couldn't physically alter my appearance because we were jumping around between. We shot it like a 360-page feature, and there was no time to look different. We just didn't have the time, so we had to invest in the idea that there was some internal transformation in Pine that rendered him invisible, that people just simply didn't recognize him. That it had been five years had passed, perhaps there were new staff. But there are nice moments when he goes back to see Yusuf in the kitchen, and Yusuf recognizes him, and he's able to call on his old contacts. As I say, an exploration in identity, in a man who is capable of wearing many faces and be credible with those masks on. It was a very exciting thing.
You know, another element of it is there are some changes. I mean, I don't mean to harp on him and tub thump about it, but the adaptations, Olivia's character is actually a man in the book, Angela Burr in the show, obviously. There is also a very different sense of Britain. It's a very different, it's a, for lack of a better expression, a more colorful and more diverse and varied one. And you see this too with Pine, as you talked about, with going with Yusuf and his brothers and his cousins and members like that. This is a man, again, to talk about your T.H. Lawrence reference, it's a man who's connecting with people, not with power all the time. How important was that to you, to show a modern Britain and a modern Middle East?
I think it's a duty to, if you set something like this in the contemporary world, to reflect that contemporary world. I mean, the best story is the casting of Olivia, which some of you may know. That Stephen Garrett and Susanna Bier decided that this character should be played by a woman. Le Carré corroborated that in our contemporary world that position is most likely filled by a woman. Susanna had a very short list with one name on it, and the name was Olivia Colman. And then, just so classic Olivia, she sort of met Susanna and said, something to tell you.
Oh my God, you're going to do another impression? We're going to take requests on the impressions later. That's fantastic.
Something to tell you. I'm pregnant. And Susanna, which is true to her, went, okay. We just write it in, it's fine. And what I love about that is...
all the voices.
I spend a lot of time with them. What I love about it is that both of them chose not to incorporate the pregnancy into the character. I mean, it was just a statement of fact. It didn't hinder her work. It wasn't... it was just something that she was going through as a woman, but it wasn't going to stop her doing her job. It's not a device in the story. It's just part of what she's doing at that time. I think that's very modern. And she does it so brilliantly. Olivia is so irreverent and so warm. When you meet her, she's got such an instinctive warmth to her. She's a terrible corpser as well. she's a real giggler. Which I mean in the best, I think so the best actors are the most giggly, actually, in my experience. Judi Dench, a huge giggler.
Big giggler.
Yep. Kenneth Branagh is a big giggler. These people, suddenly the absurdity of what they're doing strikes them and they can't stop laughing.
Just to that, though, in the sense of, let's go back to talk a little bit about you and Hugh. So you have this fabled lunch.
Yeah.
But let's talk about the first time you really see the two of you.
He asked me an amazing question. It was about, we barely...
I was about to ask you an amazing question.
Sorry, I'm sorry.
All set up.
And I interrupted you. No. He asked me, we hadn't even ordered yet, and he said, I mean, do you have any idea who you are? And I said, well, I hope so. And I suppose life is about, trying to find that out. Do you? He went, absolutely not. No idea. No idea at all. Been doing this a long time, still don't know. It's really kind of broke the ice. Anyway, sorry, you had a question about Hugh.
That's actually a much better story than where I was going to go. But you know, the first time in the show where the two of you are really solo is that scene outside where you're smoking in the snow.
Yes. Yeah.
I wanted to get a sense of what was the preparation for that scene, because it's so well blocked and played, and the way the two of you, and as he says at the end, like you didn't scurry away, you kind of played it out. Give us a sense of how you guys shot that scene, an anatomy of a scene, so to speak.
Well, we shot that scene on the first day. It was our first night. We had 3 days in Switzerland, and we had very little time. And as soon as the sun went down, we got ready to shoot it. And it felt like a huge beginning to shoot a page of a 360-page script with the two of us standing in the snow and looking at the shadow of the Matterhorn, you know, which is blocking out the moon. And it felt very momentous. It felt like it expressed itself. But also he and I had been working so much anyway in terms of talking about the script and getting ready and just the nature of prep, costume fittings and all those conversations you end up having. And to finally be there, to be at our beginning point, embarking on the journey, felt very, in a way, it played itself. Two men who recognize each other, who see each other, strangely admire each other, and are hiding from each other. It's just a very well written scene, and in a way, the silences speak for the characters, and you just, as an actor, you have to let the silence breathe and hope that the audience will interpret that.
How have you found, in terms of now that the show was a cultural phenomenon overseas in the UK, it has been incredibly acclaimed here. I personally think it's near perfect television. And you obviously have received that acclaim from the Television Academy with 12 nominations. So how has Tom Hiddleston evolved as an actor from the man who started The Night Manager to the man who is sitting here today?
That's an amazing question.
Told you I had one.
I found it a transformative one in some respect. It's one of my proudest achievements to date. I understood my responsibility and took it very seriously, and we all did. And it's made me rethink how I work. How my work continues. I feel a little spoiled by it because I was so invested myself in the project. I felt such empathy and connection to Pine, but also to the story and its resonance.
Well, I mean, I keep coming in my mind as you speak. I keep hearing that. What does it mean to be English?
Yeah,
and that's an ongoing question that's
Yeah.
now changed politically with Brexit and what have you. It's again, what does that mean?
Yeah.
What is that?
Well, what does it simply mean to be alive? I mean, that's the question of being an actor. What does it mean to be human? The Night Manager is an excavation of what does it mean to be English. But, in I Saw the Light, I'm about as far away from being English as it's possible to get.
Well, you're way gone.
Yeah. And I think that is really what I'm interested in, is trying to find points of commonality in different people. That's what I feel I've been given by other actors and by other films. Is that's if acting has any power, and perhaps that power can be diluted and masked in other things, but it is to unify as opposed to divide. And when you see something on screen by an actor you admire, this has happened to me countless times, you feel less alone in the world. You look at that performance or that scene and you say, yeah, I've been through that.
I know that story.
That's how I feel. And I think the best actors do that all the time. So that's why I think I've found it so transformative. And also, it's made me think about I hope to do more work like The Night Manager, in the sense of is the work that I do will be committed in terms of I want to see this in the world. I want the work to speak to the world in some way. That's the job of the form is to somehow make a connection in the world. So yeah, we'll see.
I didn't mean to cut you off. I'm sorry. This is the first television adaptation of a le Carré novel in 20 years. That's a pretty heavy responsibility for the man who's the leading man. And then the fact that the last leading man for the last le Carré adaptation was Alec Guinness.
Yeah, those are some big boots.
So how was that stepping in?
Well, I knew I wasn't going to be. I couldn't. There's no way of touching Alec Guinness.
Smiley's a very different character.
That's the thing. So Smiley is almost more like the Burr character. He's someone inside the circus, and Pine is outside it.
Let's explain that for a sec. That's what le Carré refers to the intelligence community.
Yeah, the circus.
There's a footnotes to our interview. You'll see them when it's on YouTube.
So yeah, it was. I understood. Obviously, that was. I tried not to think about it too much.
Sorry, I brought it up.
No, it's all right. But it's interesting that perhaps le Carré's work is served by a longer form of screen adaptation. That there is so much sophistication in his writing that you need more hours to honor that and to reflect that. But this obviously was very different. Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy is set in a very different time, and was written by a very different le Carré, I think. The Night Manager is much more. He was older. The Berlin Wall had come down. The Cold War was over, and this was a different kind of espionage tale with different kinds of issues. So I really tried to just focus on that, and as I say, was very invested in it.
You mentioned this just now about the longer form of television maybe being a better vehicle for someone like le Carré. What about for Tom Hiddleston? How about more television?
I mean, I think I never have made a distinction. I've always done television. I started in theatre and television and went to film and have come back.
This is the new golden age, and it really is. I mean, people throw that term around, peak TV or whatever.
Yeah,
television is killing it right now.
It is, yeah. And I think the reason for that.
I say that because I'm a TV critic. If I was a movie critic, it'd be all about the movies. No, but I'm serious because of that. Because Susanna she's talked about this, and others have too. And even Hugh has now gone back to television because that's a place where you can tell the stories. That's a place where you can perform your craft. That's a place where you can connect. And in many ways, you can have what you talked about, the impact, the power if acting has any. It can have that power there.
Yeah. And I think it's the way people watch things now has changed it. It seems that not everybody goes to the theatre on a Friday night or a Saturday night to see the latest release. It's everyone is so busy and committed, and so people watch things. They stream and they binge and they get stuff on Amazon and iTunes and they watch it on their iPads and they watch it on airplanes and people get stacked up and excited about airplane trips because no one's going to call you. That's where I watch all my stuff. You think that
soon they're going to call.
I know. But it's remarkable how many that's how we consume the performing arts. That's how we consume entertainment. And I speak as an audience member. So I don't really mind how it comes to me. I just care that it's good. And I think that's what people want. Is they just want quality drama. And if there's more of it, so much the better. If it's 6 hours rather than 2. That's something that's good for people because they think I can watch more of this is something I like. And perhaps the writing is more rebellious and provocative and expansive. I think films, certainly the biggest, the big ones, they have a responsibility for their opening weekend. And so they need to try to make films that are gonna really draw people into the theaters because
it's become the art of spectacle.
Yeah,
and I don't mean that in an insulting way. I mean I think that's true. I mean it's a communal effort, and you have to get people in.
Yeah, and when you see films that are really designed to honor that spectacle, you see films on the big screen.
Like this Avenger film? Just waiting for you to drop it out there?
I think it works on the big screen. I think so. I think Avengers is a classic example of I think the more people in the same room watching that film on the biggest screen available, the better. And I've had, I still go and see those big tentpole movies because I love the excitement of going to see it at the IMAX, whether it's Mission Impossible, Ghost Protocol. That just was the action in that is if you're going to see Tom Cruise hanging onto the side of an airplane, you need to see it on a big screen.
That's not so good on your iPhone.
Right, exactly. If you're going to see Vin Diesel drive the fastest car you can find through 3 skyscrapers in Abu Dhabi in Furious 7, you need to see that at the IMAX. But that's also not to say that there isn't also the power of those of the smaller stories on the big screen as well. That's not to denigrate those. I think they can also be very powerful. When you see, I think of the last batch of big awards contenders, films like Spotlight and Room, were very powerful on the screen. The Revenant, Birdman. These were the films that people went to see in numbers, which were intelligent and thought-provoking. So, of course, there is still a place for provocative, serious cinema.
Let's then make a natural transition. And if you don't mind for a second, we're going to leave The Night Manager behind, and let's talk about I Saw the Light. Because it was one of my favorite films. I say last year, but it actually, you debuted in Toronto in 2015. But it came out last year when it was released, I believe, by Sony. And so it was remarkable. I mean, Tom, I think you're a good actor. Hank Williams is like, dude, like that's like, half of America will have your name. Like if you don't pull that off right? Yeah. It's like playing Churchill in England. Like you have to do it right because otherwise you'll never doing anything again. You are amazing. And obviously. So give us a sense of preparing that role. There's nothing new about Brits coming to America and telling American stories, but there is something about saying, I'm going to come to America and tell one of the great 20th century creative force stories there is. Yeah. And you play a mean guitar.
Thank you. It was a big choice. But I think it was so exciting because it was so foreign, and as you said in your introduction, it's. Oh,
I hope you didn't listen to that. It was terribly embarrassing.
I was just standing over there, Dominic. But you said Sorry to blow up for you, man.
Ruin the illusion.
I was
my
waiting
friend.
in the wings. I think it's not just in acting. I think it's an interesting function of society that we are encouraged to stay in our lane, and I think people are constantly surprising. I think people change their minds. They change their minds quite often in life, and in a way, that's when Hank Williams came along. I knew it was absolutely the last time that would be possible because he died when he was 29. And I was already 31 when I read the script. But I knew I looked young enough to play him. And the screenplay, as it was pitched to me, it wasn't so much about tracking a. It wasn't a musical. It was Mark Abraham pitched it to me as a portrait of the artist as a young man and portrait of a marriage, and that this was about someone who struggled with the reception of his creative work, and he struggled because the source that work came from was very painful to him, and yet it resonated. And the more research I did, the more I couldn't help but follow my curiosity. Is that he became he was someone who inspired generations of musicians whose work we continue to enjoy. He inspired Keith Richards and Mick Jagger.
He inspired everyone.
Everybody.
I mean,
Dylan,
Hank's one of those.
Chris Christopherson, probably Elvis, Leonard Cohen.
The Clash.
Yeah,
I mean, it's everyone. It is.
They all sort of Springsteen. They all tipped their hat to him, and I was interested in this idea of, if you go to Nashville and you go to a honky tonk,
I love any conversation that starts with "if you go to Nashville."
If you go to
I know. I lived in this. I love Nashville.
Yeah.
I mean, Nashville's a special
It's
place.
Music City.
You go to these cafes
Yeah.
and you hear the best guitar player you've ever heard in the world.
Yeah.
And then it's like half the size of this room.
But on pretty much every cafe, in every honky tonk, there are murals of Johnny Cash and Patsy Cline and Loretta Lynn and Hank Williams, and everyone says Hank was the first. And his silhouette with that cowboy hat and the way he lived, he's seen as someone who was sort of just so authentic and iconic in American culture. And I had the chance to try and explore the man, to take him off the pedestal and get behind it, because there's an amazing. I watched a documentary in which some of his old bandmates, the Drifting Cowboys, are interviewed, and there's a guy called Danny Dill who says they're sitting in the old sedan car that they used to tour around the country with, and Danny says,
By the way, I have to. That's gangster.
Yeah, yeah,
It really is.
yeah. But he says, the thing is.
Oh my God, you're doing it again. You are so going to do me later tonight, this evening, aren't you? I was talking this guy.
Yeah, this guy. Anyway, so this guy, Danny Dill, he says this thing, which I loved. The thing is, legends don't know they're legends when they're being made. They just people. They just folks. And I thought, God, that Hank Williams is a legend, but before he was a legend, he was a young man just trying to make his way in show business. I can relate to that. He started when he was young. He was desperate to get up on that stage and perform. He wrote his own stuff. He, got in cars and tried to get gigs, tried to get a record deal, a publishing deal. He tried to get on the radio. I can relate to that. Not as a musician, but as an actor. I was in this town. I started out in London, graduated from drama school, auditioned for everything, failed to get everything, kept auditioning, and you're just trying to get a foot in the door because you simply believe in it. You just want to be part of the conversation. And then he became very successful very quickly, and he didn't have a support network around him, and he fell victim to temptation. He was a binge drinker, and I found his descent captivating and tragic. And I still, it repeats as well, which I find so saddening, actually. I went to see the Asif Kapadia documentary about Amy Winehouse, who I grew up with, and her, the pattern of her life is very similar to the pattern of Hank's life. This idea that there are artistic people who are so they almost live with a layer of skin peeled away. They're so sensitive and so vulnerable, and yet their vulnerability is what makes them great, and it's what we connect to. We can, especially in music, because there's nothing more naked than music, singing, and so when we hear them sing, the same is true of Johnny Cash. When you hear him sing, you can hear the pain in his voice, and that's what we connect to. And for Hank and for Amy Winehouse, they just couldn't handle it, and they were sort of eaten up by it or consumed by it in some way. So I wanted to sort of explore that.
Did you ever think, you know what, I know I'm a good actor and I know I'm committed to this, but this is a bridge too far. I can't move into this role.
Let me be very clear. It was absolutely fucking terrifying. It was. I've never sang professionally in my life.
That's bullshit. You did a great job.
I promise you, I don't know why I thought I could.
That was the swearing part of our conversation.
Right. I don't know why I thought I could do it. Except that I was so encouraged by the confidence of Mark Abraham and Rodney Crowell, who helped me with the music, who insisted that it wasn't about replicating Hank Williams' sound, because no one's going to sound like Hank Williams, because the sound of Hank Williams is part of his unique physiognomy, because the voice is a physical thing. So there's no way that the way my instrument is arranged is going to sound like his, but it was a leap of interpretation that actually all I had to do was commit to the sincerity of the songs and to commit to feeling his pain as it related to me, and that would translate and have the same effect. And that meant it was an acting question, because acting is interpretation. You take a character and you step into those shoes and you live that life, and you find the points in yourself which match that life. So you're interpreting something. I'm quite sure that there's a part of le Carré in Jonathan Pine, but I was interpreting Pine as he related to me, and the same is true for Hank. And that music is that all I had to do is interpret those feelings as they were written into song, and hopefully translate the power of it.
Now, you obviously came out of a theater background,
Yeah.
and I always think that theater performers, and for lack of a better expression, but I mean all musicians, rock and roll stars, kind of have the best gig around, because when they perform, it's there, it's present. They're there, they feel it back, and they feel it like you understand emotions or anger or whatever. You're like, oh, back off, jump in, back and forth. What you do often is you go and work, and it happens with a small community of people, and then down the line, you sit in a premiere and see people clap to it, or you hear people talk about it as it responds, as they feel it as a show. What was it like standing there in front of 300, 500 extras, and you're singing Hank Williams?
It was the best part of the shoot, if I'm honest. I suddenly understood why people do this forever. There's an extraordinary effect that music has on people. It creates such joy immediately. I hadn't anticipated that standing on stage and singing "Hey Good Lookin'" in front of 500 people I didn't know was going to make us feel like we'd all known each other for years, because those songs are so feel good, you know. That's what they say about country music, isn't it? It's like sad songs to happy tunes. Yeah. But there's a real electricity. We shot all the music in as one sort of 10-day sequence. So every day I was shooting another number, or sometimes 2 numbers a day, and different points in the story. But I had such respect for musicians and for singers, because they're so naked. Actors get to hide behind character, even though we're really expressing ourselves, but people don't tell that side of the story. But musical performers are up there, and it's them, you know, especially
Microphone, guitar. That's
microphone, guitar. This is a song I wrote. This is how I feel. But the power you have to make people feel good is extraordinary, that's the reason why people are, you know, these performers are unstoppable. You know, Willie Nelson and Mick Jagger, and you know, Mick Jagger still got it.
He really does have it. That's
he really
the thing,
does.
right?
Yeah, it's amazing.
He basically is becoming an old blues man.
Yeah.
By action, not default.
Yeah.
Let's talk about, you mentioned this a little while ago. You talked about when you first started auditioning. Not exactly the success record you expected, and it's you look for traction.
Yeah.
What was it like coming here to Los Angeles as a British actor, trying to find your way, find a path, find a role in this industry? Because this is the magnet that we're all drawn to, but it doesn't always attract.
Well, I mean, I look back on it now with affection, because I was so naive, I think, but I loved the possibility that when I came out here, it seemed like there was such possibility. I was always so curious about LA. It seemed like Oz, you know, a place for British actors. It was sort of a place over the hills and far away where the magic happened.
Which is technically Santa Monica,
right? And I had spent my 20s in the theatre, having a fantastic time and a very fulfilling time. But I worked with actors who had lived here and worked here, and I was always curious listening to their stories. And I think I first came to LA solely with Shakespearean credits to my name, and that's not an everyday conversation you have in Hollywood, you know. But
hire me or not to hire me?
That
would be the question, my friend.
I found it. I look back on it with huge affection, because it was such a time of like, I learned about auditioning here. I learned about preparation. I learned about
You
instinct.
learn about becoming a film actor. There's a wonderful quote from Richard Burton once where he talked about, after all the hoopla of him and Elizabeth Taylor getting together, but he said, people talk, oh, you're a great actor and she's just a great beauty. And he's like, hey, she's a great movie star. And he said, she taught me how to be a film star. She taught me that the big expression that I'd use in the theater had no role here. It was the flicker of the eye, it was the mouth, it was the look, it was the feeling, and I emanated it into the camera. Was there a process there for you?
Yes, certainly. And I did lots of interesting auditions. I did auditions for films that I didn't get, and TV shows I didn't get, and I had these hilarious afternoons in pilot season where I would be up for 25 things in a space of a week, and thinking somehow that I needed to differentiate these characters in my mind, I would pack my Toyota Camry with 3 or 4 different shirts. One was for the cop, one was for the journalist, one was for the Secret Service guy, and one was for the soldier, thinking somehow that wearing a different shirt was going to make a difference. But I developed a facility for absorbing material very quickly, and sometimes also you meet casting directors and they know they sort of take you on, and they can teach you stuff. I remember being invited by a casting director to read in camera tests for a huge movie, a big studio picture, and I was reading the role of the leading actor, and they were testing actresses for the leading female role, and it was so interesting to see them all come in and read the same material and make different choices. But actually, what emerged as I watched them was who they were. He's right. Burton is right in a sense, is that the camera is ruthless in its depiction of the truth. You can't lie in front of the camera. You all know that. But there's something I learned that is sort of actually who you are is what the camera will see. And there's only so many conscious choices you can make, because the camera's making the choices for you, in a sense. And that was very instructive. A director once told me that American actors are much more instinctive about this, which is the camera's just snooping. You're having a private conversation, and the camera is just eavesdropping. Which
did that change something inside you when you heard that?
Yeah, I think it's just trying to find a way of being free in front of it, because of course it can be very. Initially, I think, having done so much stage work, I found just to be relaxed in front of it, to not be so deliberate, or prepared or rehearsed. That the camera is interested in real life. It's interested in truthful behavior. It's not interested in anything that's been prepared. It's interested in honesty, and that was something I had to learn, or at least practice, or become accustomed to.
A lot of people, of course, know you from playing Loki, and a lot of people are going to see you playing Loki again. You're actually literally, 48 hours from now, jumping back on the plane and going back to Australia to literally go back and jump back in costume again, introduce yourself on Instagram via that way. And then next year, you're going to be in Kong Skull Island, where you play another tentpole character. Yeah. But I think, a lot of what we talked about here is a lot about your passion for acting. And to that end, as we have to wrap up soon, but we have some questions from you guys. So this is actor on actor. So I'm going to not really do a very good job of picking these. This is a question from.
I have a tendency to answer. I just talk too much.
There's no. Actually, I completely disagree.
Okay.
I think that you talk wonderfully and you speak wonderfully about things, about your life and your career and your craft, and that's exactly why people are here to listen. Because far too often, you do a million interviews, and when you're doing things like Marvel movies and Legendary and Warner Brothers movies, you have to do press junkets. It's part of your job. This is where I think you get to talk about who you are, or to help answer Hugh's question.
Yes.
And to that end, this is a question from Mary. What is the one most enjoyable thing about acting for you?
I think the most enjoyable thing about acting for me is when I sense that in pushing myself and challenging myself to explore new territory, when you make a connection with people, when people tell you that they've been moved by something, or that they related to something, it's about connection, and I find it stems from my own passion as an audience member. I remember my world being changed, the way I saw the world. I remember it being changed by films, by theatre. The day that I saw One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, I woke up and I couldn't stop thinking about it for weeks. And I think cinema and theatre, and the same is true of, I've told this story before, but I went to see a production of John Gabriel Borkman at the National Theatre when I was 14. And it's the last time that Paul Scofield was on stage. And he was with Vanessa Redgrave and Eileen Atkins. And I was very conscious of an audience of strangers arriving at the National Theatre after a day of doing whatever they were doing their job, coming from all quarters of the city to London, to the home of the theatre on the South Bank, having a drink, catching up, rushing in, taking their seats, the lights going down, and 3 hours later, the entire theatre sobbing, wiping away the same tears in recognition of the same grief, which is universal, and feeling like Paul Scofield, particularly, had spoken to my experience, and I'd never met him, and I will always be grateful to him for that. And so that's what I love about it, really, is that if, as I say, that's acting connects people. That's what I enjoy.
This is a question from Liv, and maybe you've sort of answered this or begun the answer to this. What advice would you give aspiring actors? Get a Toyota. Lots of shirts.
I always repeat. I repeat the advice that was given to me by Pete Postlethwaite over a pint of Guinness when I was 21.
Okay, you don't really need to tell more of that story. It's so good already.
I went to see him in a one-man show at the Lyric Hammersmith with a friend of mine called Andrew Buchan, and it was my first term at drama school, and we went to the pub afterwards. He was amazing in it, and there was Pete standing at the bar, and we thought, we've got to go and say hello. So we told him what we were doing. We just started acting training, and we said, can we buy you a pint? Which he was happy to have. So we bought him a pint of Guinness, and he just said, all right, lads, I'll tell you this. Don't let the bastards grind you down.
This is going to be our last question, and it's from...
We can do 3 more.
All right. I really want to do 3 more. All right. Well, this is from a Brit, as she says, Natalie Gray. And by the way, thank you guys, all of you who did these questions. They're fantastic, and it's really great that you participate like this. We both really appreciate it. I know I've made fun of you about it, but she talks about it here. She talks about... she asks a question about Hugh, but she has a second question, which is, any tips on creating an American accent? Because you're pretty good at it, brother.
Oh, I don't know, actually. The American is I find quite challenging.
And I guess one question one asks that is, there, of course, there's the regions of an American accent and the dialect.
Yeah. I don't know. I guess listen is the first thing. I don't know. I've always been a sort of parrot. I've always been able to imitate people. But it's very specific when you have to find your own voice as well. There was an old trick they used to say at drama school about accents, which is about the tune of accents. So an English accent goes over the top of the phrase and down. If you want to emphasize something, then you go up in pitch and then you go down.
Is this technically you doing your Hugh Laurie impersonation?
No. And Southern Irish does the same thing. If you want to emphasize something in the Southern Irish accent, you go up in pitch and then you go down. Whereas Northern Ireland, you go under and up. And if you want to stress something, if you're from Northern Ireland, you go down in pitch.
All right. All right, so we're going to play a game now. So you're no. Your mum's Welsh, but your dad is from the Midlands.
I can't do it. I can't do it. Please don't ask me to.
Gotta find one
I can't
accent.
do the combination. I suppose it's just about tune. You have to listen to the tune, I guess. Some accents are easier than there's always a strange tradition that British people find a Southern American accent easier. That Southern drawl. I don't know why that should be.
Well, I think part of it just because a lot of, especially working class British voices, are about sort of what you were talking about earlier. It's sort of the silence between the words, or it's the cadence overflow.
Yeah.
And Southern accents are like that too. They always tip a little bit. They tip over the glass a little bit. There's always that feeling the word's going to linger a bit more.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe that's it. I don't know. It's that listen and practice is all I would say. That's how you master another accent.
But we're going to go back to another question. But how? There's no other way to put this. How are things going with Thor 3?
Things are great. It's actually it's huge fun. It really is fantastic. There's the cast is to die for. We have Mark Ruffalo and Kate Blanchett and Tessa Thompson. Idris Elba.
Now, has he actually shown up in Australia yet?
He hasn't. No. He's a busy man.
Yeah, I've heard.
Idris
He's
Elba
very busy.
he's got many irons in the fire.
And he's got a fashion line now too.
So he does. Yeah.
Which you might want to think about.
Maybe I will.
Can you do Idris?
All right, Tom, how's it going, mate? All right, Tom. What's going on then? What's going on?
There's an amazing podcast.
What's all this fucking Bond bollocks, eh?
There's going to be an amazing podcast of you doing Idris meeting Tom Hardy in a pub. Called Who Said What?
Maybe one day. Yeah. Anyway, I can't wait to see him. Idris is such an old friend now, and he hasn't, so he's not on set yet. But Taika Waititi is directing, whose films you should seek out if you haven't seen them. He recently made a film called The Hunt for the Wilder People, which is one of the best films I've seen this year. It's so great, and Sam Neill is in it, and it's a beautiful story about a boy who's a bit of a lost soul, but it's very funny. Taika's got a fantastic sense of humor, and he's brought that sense of humor to the Thor script. I think he's capitalizing on Chris Hemsworth's innate ability to be funny.
You're talking about Ghostbusters.
Yeah.
No, I mean that was a revelation. I mean, Chris was really funny.
I think he's funny as Thor. I mean, there's something so great in the first film when he walks into a pet store and says, "I need a horse."
It does feel like they give you a lot of the laughs in Thor movies, though. Because you get it, you're the villain.
Well, he is the god of mischief.
Yeah.
So, it is arguably a requirement.
Yes.
But there's a lot of humor in this too, and also the fact that the Hulk is in Thor 3 as well. You'll have to wait and see. The idea that Thor, the Hulk, and Loki are sharing space, I think, is intrinsically funny.
Tight space.
Yeah. Tight spaces.
Yeah.
Both of them not, a little anxious about what's going to happen.
It's remarkable, though. I mean, in many ways, you have followed a very classic and I think a very thoughtful route with your career, which is you have these big tentpole films. I mean, literally next year you have 2 of them. Yeah. And yet you have something which is so crafted and intimate like The Night Manager or I Saw the Light. Do you have a preference, or is it the ability, again, to go back to that phrase we're using, the ability to change lanes? That's actually where the action is.
Well, the thing is, I love both. I love watching both, and I love reading both. And so the idea that I could get to be included in all of this work is really what I'm most grateful for. I go to see the tentpole movies as a fan. Truly, I go to see Mission Impossible and the Furious movies because I think they're so fun. But I like watching intimate, intelligent, intricate work that's made on a smaller scale, and so I want to make it as well. And I've always found the challenge of these big films, which are sometimes contingent on visual effects, is there is a discipline about that kind of acting, is that you're required to imagine the thing that isn't there, which is almost pure acting. It's pure theatre. And so whether that, I spent 6 months staring off into space and interacting in different ways with Kong. And Kong was sometimes a tennis ball, and Kong was sometimes, a piece of tape on a tree.
No illusions here tonight, my friend, are there?
Yeah. There was no big monkey. Didn't see him. Never came out of his trailer.
Yeah. Very temperamental.
Huge
Big
diva.
star.
Yeah.
Wait, this is an interesting question from, I think it's Kendra. I'm sorry if I can't quite make out the handwriting. Asked, having been in both the roles of both an actor and a producer, do you now have a preference for one, and if so, which one? It's a trick question.
I would say the thing about I wasn't really a producer. I couldn't give myself that credit. I was included in creative conversations, I suppose.
That is kind of being a producer.
Yeah, but I didn't have to organize helicopters and just keep the trains running on time, which really producers have to do. It's heavy lifting. But I did find that whatever my responsibilities as a producer were, invigorated and intensified my commitment as an actor, because I understood the screenplay. It deepened my sense of the entire project, and that investment was something I was really grateful for. So I hope it's something I can do again. Anyway, so we'll see.
So let's talk and end with this, to talk about something you could do again. There is not a follow-up book to The Night Manager, but the Cornwell brothers are representing their father's works quite aggressively and enthusiastically, and it looks like they're interested in doing a lot more than just The Night Manager with this great canon of modern literature that is le Carré. Would you return to his world?
Hypothetically, it's important to stress. Yes, but it isn't up to me. I think if it ever came to fruition, we would have to seriously consider how these characters would move forward.
Because it is left open.
Yeah.
It is left open at the end.
I couldn't stop thinking about it when I finished. Where does Pine go at the end of episode 6? He has $300 million in a bank account under the name of Andrew Birch. What happens to that money? And to what extent is he able even to adapt to the world? His name is on a hit list and a watch list. He has. Who does he become? Where does he go? It's a fascinating question. I think always why the spy genre endures is these very brave people who do very brave things, and they surrender their name, and so how do you re-enter the world after that? After an experience like that, how do you go? Rather like Jeremy Renner's character in The Hurt Locker, how do you go back into normal life when you have no dependents and you have no intimates? So that's a question I wouldn't mind answering, but we don't know and may not for some time. I'll leave it with you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Tom Hiddleston. Thank you so much. Thank you.